Welcome to Mining for Waking, and today with a panel from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server, everybody, we are talking about cultural cognitive grammar. And in the room with us, Valeria, Algernon, Harris, Peter, and you guys don't see him, but he is very much here in spirit and voice, Chance. Everybody. So the subject is very deep. It's a huge conversation. Sorry, it's a huge conversation. Like we can talk days about it. I think it's difficult. Sorry. It's difficult to keep it short, but we will try it. I found a short description here. Cultural cognitive grammar is a particular cognitive linguistic theory that stands out as radical due to certain basic claims, notably that grammar is wholly symbolic and that basic grammatical notions such as noun, verb, and subject have unified conceptual characterizations. Cultural cognitive grammar emphasizes the role of culture in shaping our cognitive processes and argues that language is not just a tool for communication, but also a way of thinking about the world. It suggests that our understanding of language and grammar is shaped by our cultural experiences and that this understanding influences how we think about the world around us. There. I made it, I read it. And guys, my panel today prepared their own homework on the subject. And I would like to invite Harris to present his view of cultural cognitive grammar first.
Hey, thank you very much, Kara. I was expecting Valeria to go first, but nevertheless, thank you. This is a very interesting and complex topic, and to prepare for it, it was truly a journey that I particularly enjoyed. One of the very first things that I would like to add is that something that John shared in one of his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis videos. It's that he was deeply influenced by a philosopher of logic, mathematics, and mind, but also a philosopher of language known as Wittgenstein, in order to develop this notion of cultural cognitive grammar. So this is something that I needed to share with everyone in this introductory remark. Now, according to John, cultural cognitive grammar consists of three main components, namely cognitive models, cognitive frames, and also cognitive grammars. Just to give a small background here, cognitive models are a mental representation of concepts, categories, and domains that we use to organize our experience and knowledge. Cognitive frames, on the other hand, are structures that organize our cognitive models into coherent scenarios or situations that guide our expectations and actions. Basically, we can understand this in terms of what-if scenarios. And finally, cognitive grammars are rules and patterns that govern how we combine and manipulate those cognitive models and frames in language, but also in thought. So John Vervaeke issued a couple of papers around this topic. I will just mention two of them. One is called Relevance Realization and the Emerging Framework in Cognitive Science, and the other one is Wisdom as Meta-heuristic Foresight, where he actually uses cultural cognitive grammar to explore how wisdom that is the ability to make good judgments, basically, and decisions in complex and assertive situations, is actually related to foresight, that is the ability to anticipate and prepare for future events. So he actually proposes that wisdom involves the use of meta-heuristics, that they are actually in general strategies or principles even that guide our problem solving and decision making, and that they inform, that they are getting informed and guided by our cognitive models, frames, and grammars. So John concludes that the wisdom can actually be cultivated by enhancing those that element of ours, that is meta-heuristic foresight, through various practices, what he calls the ecology of practices. That includes dialectical reasoning and dialogical inquiry, and also all those other nice practices that we are all familiar of. So this is what I wanted to add at this point.
Oh, wow. A lot of information. Thank you, Haris. It's nice that it's caught on video. I will be able to rewatch it and process it a little bit better. So next, I would like to invite Arjun.
So in preparing for this, I'd originally seen John's videos and heard what he'd said about these things, and I wanted a refresher on it. And so I decided to use ChatGPT to see what I'd get. And so I'd asked it, I said, I'd like to get a clear understanding of what Dr. John Vervaeke's concept of cultural cognitive grammar is. What would be a good summary? And I won't read the entire thing, but I'll go through most of it here. Every culture implicitly has a grammar or structure for how it thinks, perceives, or interacts in the world, just like linguistic grammar dictates how words string together into coherent sentences. A cognitive cultural grammar dictates how we string experiences, perceptions, and actions together to form meaningful patterns in our lives. Cognitive processes. Human cognition is not just about processing abstract information. It's deeply intertwined with embodied emotion and social interactions. Our culture shapes our cognitive processes in a foundational manner. This includes our ways of attention, perception, problem solving, and even how we experience relevance realization. I don't want to keep reading the whole thing, but it ended up having its own sort of self-referential thing that made me think, which is the idea of seeking an answer from ChatGPT, or to say, like, what is the answer of this thing, struck me as being similar to the idea of having an oracle. And in Greek times, where people at that time had a tradition which would be part of their cultural cognitive grammar, which would be, when in times where you need external input on a decision, to consult the oracle. And so what struck me was that this is actually a form of that, where using ChatGPT is something like consulting an oracle, not the same, but consulting something externally. And that is not prevalent now, I wouldn't say, in our culture. But as I thought about that, I realized that we've been Googling for answers now for some decades. And that's also seeking an external answer where you're like, oh, I'll find it, boom, here's the answer. So this like reliance on some external thing to get at what you think you know is, I would say, part of our modern cultural grammar.
I understand. So without the necessity to memorize everything, for example, we always know that at the palms of our hand is the answer. So we kind of have that crutch that we can always lean on to, let's say, and it becomes more and more common in our life, and kind of shapes our current culture. Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Algernon. So, Peter, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I can have a little bit of a different understanding from Harris. The research that I did was not from Vervaeke. It was actually from a guy named Robert Langaric, I think. Let me look at my notes. It's actually Ronald Langacker. Yeah, so that's cognitive grammar, and that was proposed alongside with Noam Chomsky's theory of generative grammar, which posited a universal grammar and is primarily concerned with these formal rules and structures, but cognitive grammar is primarily focused on meaning. And something that's interesting to me is that Vervaeke holds to the idea of a universal grammar, the Chomsky idea, but he's also advocates very heavily for cognitive grammar, which is a very different idea entirely, because that idea focuses much more on what are the cognitive schemas that we're building that we can use to share in these same channels of meaning and use to make sense of things, while generative grammar is mostly focused on what's the structure of the language and can we derive a meta structure out of all of that. And so there's criticisms of both theories, and I think what Vervaeke is really doing is he's taking the best of both, which is mostly cognitive grammar, but he is keeping the idea of universal grammar from Chomsky, and I don't know why he's doing that yet. It's something I'd like to ask him. But yeah, grammar is really, really important, because grammar is how we think. We use grammar before we think. It's the structure of our thoughts, and if you don't follow the implicit rules of grammar, then you can't make sense with anybody else. And so it's the mechanism that we use to convert raw meaning into intelligible dialogue. And if I wasn't doing that, I would just be speaking gibberish right now, and I can't speak gibberish and expect you guys all to understand what I mean with what I say. And so it's because of grammar that we can understand what we say. But cultural cognitive grammar is like an addendum to cognitive grammar, and it has to do with the cultural aspects of grammar and how those get shaped. And so when you a lot throughout history, a philosopher will come in and they will do all this great philosophy work, and then they will imbue the culture that they're in with all of these new ways of thinking about things. And those new ways of thinking about things would be categorized as cultural cognitive grammar. And sometimes they have great effects and sometimes they do not. And so I'm hoping that we get to talk about some of the historical philosophers that have altered our cultural cognitive grammar. But yeah, that's mostly what it's about. It's much more focused on meaning than it is about form. It's much more focused on association, and then there's a lot of Gestalt psychology, which is the process of taking a lot of these complex things together and putting them into concrete units. So like every word that I'm saying can be construed in different ways, and there you can essentially get different interpretations from what I'm saying and reach different meanings. And then there's different categorizations, different cognitive schemas. But yeah, it's the process of being able to build these models where we can then all share within that meaning, and that's cognitive grammar.
Thank you, Chance. Chance. Sorry, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So, Chance, can you go next? Is there a chance?
Sure. So I don't really have a solid handle on what cultural cognitive grammar actually refers to. I've been meandering quite a bit, looking at a lot of different things. And I guess the essence of that, what I'm looking at it from is it's like the culturally communicated constraining factors that shape the possibilities of what you keep up as possible. One interesting thing that just got pointed out recently is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is linguistic relativity, which posits that language influences its speaker's worldview or cognition, and thus individuals' languages determine or shape their perceptions of the world. And so it's more the structure of the concepts of what's possible that kind of interests me, and its implications. I also found Lyra Borodotsky, I think that's her name. She did a presentation on cultural linguistics, and that she gave some examples of how this can have like real effect and impact in the world, in our relations, and how we coordinate in a society, particularly when it comes to issues of like culpability or something. So it's the impact is far outsized to our awareness of what it is. And I'm just hoping to be able to get a clearer image of these often hidden factors.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chant. And Valeria, you got the closing statement.
Yeah, so I have a few short definitions here. I might say them later, but there were other things that I wanted to mention. So why do I think that that is important? And why do I think that, why am I into the Vervaeke project, and why do I care about all those terms, and why do I care about what we are doing here? It became clear to me when I was trying to prepare for this live stream. More than just understanding the terms, I think that one thing that John Vervaeke is trying to do is that he says, like, our cognitive grammar that we have right now in the West has some things that are creating the meaning crisis. And he is trying to give us different elements. He's trying to help us create a better grammar. So, for example, one of the things that he points that is problematic with our cultural cognitive grammar is the Cartesian framework. That we always, yeah, you put it on the chat. We separate objective and subjective as if that was a separation in the world because of Descartes, like res cognitas and res extensa. So it's either something is subjective or that thing is objective. And we don't have any access to the transjective, to the relationship that I think Nishatani talks about, that the objective things are things that are represented as an object. And who is doing the representation? I am doing the representation. So it's not that separable, the objective and subjective. Another example that I have is the Newtonian cognitive grammar. The formulating causality as A causes B causes C causes D, which is great for avoiding circular explanations, but terrible when we have systems that have a lot of feedback loops. And if you want to study dynamical systems, you cannot use that kind of grammar anymore. And we have this tendency to think of causality only in a Newtonian way, which makes us very difficult, for example, to study wisdom, which is a thing that is a super, and relevance realization, which is super full of feedback loops, right? What I find relevant determines what I pay attention to. What I pay attention to determines what I find relevant. Therefore, I cannot study relevance realization. Wisdom is impossible, and let's just do something else. There was another example that I found. There is a lot of these little things in our cognitive grammar that is hindering us from finding the meaning. And for example, the science versus religion, either it's science or it's religion, and they are both frameworks that are trying to figure out what reality is, in either one is wrong or the other is wrong. Or the framework of framing everything as good or bad, and we want more of the good and less of the bad, instead of thinking in terms of trade-offs. It's like, if I get more of this, I get this good things and those bad things. And if I get more of this, I get this good things and those bad things. And thinking about, we discussed a lot about it on opponent processing. It's like, no, they're different, and they're both important, even though they are opposing. And mind and body, that's also this distinction between mind and body. It's not a distinction because they're super related. So maybe now I can present the definitions. It's like, but in words, in John's words, it's the fundamental patterns of intelligibility, the habitual ways in which we formulate our problems and we think about things. Is this objective, is subjective? Is this, how was the causality here? Is this good or is it bad? These mental habits, the fundamental categories that we use in order to work our ontology and articulate our experience. Those they shape the way in which we see the world. And when we try to solve the problems and understand the problems, we are caught in this frame because that's how we think. It's the lenses through which we think. So to make it all that story short, my hope is not only that we can understand propositionally what those things, those Vervaeke terms means, but we can like think more Vervaekianly. Like we can, yeah, seriously. For example, that we can see the world in terms of opponent processing, see the world in terms of transjective, see the world in terms of dynamical systems. And that might help us find more of the meaning that we're looking for. That is my hope. And it has worked for me. So that is what I have to say.
Thank you. I can relate a little bit to having a frame of understanding reality, let's say. Frames through which we can analyze certain happenings in our being. That relevance realization concept, even though I lived it, I have never thought about it. I have never thought, oh, I find this relevant because it's important for me and because it's important. Like that idea, paying attention to what I find relevant and what does it say about who I am, right? Like if I look for, there is this saying in Russian, I will translate it, that fly will see shit everywhere, but the bee will see flowers. And so the different things in the same field will be relevant to different people. And the idea why I cannot understand my reality because I'm inside it, I'm inside the frame. All of those ideas I learned from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series that I watched. I did not think like that before, let's say. So it influenced the way I perceive reality. And that's the reason why I wanted to talk about it. And thank you for putting some spotlight onto it, Valeria. Okay, guys, now it's just free discussion, and then we will move on to clips. And in the clips, John will probably mention one of the definitions Valeria read. Yeah. Arjuna?
I was gonna say, if this is a real, and I'm reluctant to use the word relevant, if this is a real and relevant thing to our modern lives, then what is our cultural cognitive grammar? Like, what are elements? Where do we see that? Like in our existing culture, let's say, or Western culture, since that's what I think most of us are, all of us are existing in. I find that question interesting, to look at what is my own grammar, what things would I attribute to like the grammar of how I make sense because of the Western thought processes. First thing I'm struck by is that to say like there is a culture is itself just symbolic because we don't all live in one culture. There's so many different aspects about what an individual experiences that constructs sort of a personal level culture for them. So I don't think we all experience exactly the same culture, but these grammar elements may actually be something we were talking about universal. There may be some universal aspects that actually do span across everybody's experience of what we would consider the Western culture. So the question I put there to the group then is, what are they? Like, what are just some instances of cognitive cultural grammar in our modern Western society?
So I've got a really good one that I want to bring up, which is one that was brought to us from Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. And it has to do with the idea of cutting off us access to transcendence. I'm sure Lutherans would have a great problem with what I have to say, but the idea essentially is that we don't ascend to God, it's God who descends to us. And by inverting that, we lose access to self-transcendence. And I remember Vervaeke in the series said that Martin Luther saw self-transcendence as the sin of pride. And so he encouraged this idea of being saved by grace alone. And so now we have a lot of religious institutions here in the West that proclaim that all you need to do is accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and that's it. And then you're saved. Nothing, no transformation, just a assertion of a proposition, and that's it. And that would be one element in our cultural cognitive grammar that's affecting us, and at least Christianity.
I was a bit surprised by the question, Matthew, because I named like
I know you did.
a lot of them. So the subjective objective mind and body divide, that's one thing that is part of our cognitive grammar, that is not corresponding to the best way that we could see reality, because mind and body are not separated by any stretch of the imagination. If you Antonio Damasio in his books, Self Comes to Mind, and the other one, I forgot the name, Descartes' error. He talks about how the mind is very much embodied in cognition. The good and bad, the framing, if two things are opposing each other, one of them is wrong and the other is right.
Yeah. That binary framework of there's this and not this.
And if things are opposing each other, they necessarily need to be fighting for dominance, or they cannot work together. They cannot be working towards the same goal if they are opposing each other.
I wonder if a base level thing for Eastern would be more like, look, they would always consider what is the balance between the two, and the Western would be like, which of these wins?
Exactly, yeah. The yin and yang. It's interesting that if you look at the four elements, fire, water, and la la la, that we have a long time ago, they are described in terms of their characteristics. If you look at the Chinese and Eastern 5 elements, they are described in terms of how one transforms into another. So they focus on the change, and we focus on the characteristics. I found it very interesting. How they focus on how the things are interrelated, and we focus on how they are different from each other.
Right. Yeah, it's no surprise we get the noumena from Kant, and then this solipsism.
Yeah, I wanted to also to provide an answer in terms of examples. It's something that I also pasted in the chat. Back in the late 50s, there was an economist professor from Greece, Xenophon Zolotas, he actually delivered two speeches that they are quite famous in both Greece and Cyprus. And he delivered those speeches in English, but he was using only Greek words. So they are very interesting. They are a bit of an oddity, but the good thing is that the cool thing about it is that everybody in the audience understood him. So you can easily check online and found him. But yeah, I believe that's one example I have.
Could you send that?
Tell me again.
Yeah, could you send that in the chat?
Yeah.
I actually was curious, is it because a lot of words of the English language were borrowed from the Greek language? It's like more or less this connection. Yeah, in the questions of linguistic, as a Russian-speaking person, it always was bizarre to me how in English language, the noun and the verb can be the same word. So love and to love, both of them are love, where in Russian it's like a massive distinction, like massive. There is любовь, it's like has a strong ending, it's like stands on 2 feet, and любить. And любить is like more flowy, it's to move, like the action sounds different even. It's like massively distinct. And even in German language, for example, like the way you write it, so the nouns are capitalized. They're like they have this gravity to them immediately. And in the German language, so the nouns, they can even you can grow them. They could be like those zusammengesetzte Wörter. Like you can have a super long word. Building it together, like you can add nouns to it, or you can add verbs to it as well, for example, but like in order to build the long word, but it will have not only the capital letter but also article to it. Article is like der, die, das, for example, like those the kind of introduction of the noun in the German language, like that's the way you, and it is this gravity to it. Whereby like in English language, it was absolutely, it's easy to learn, like English is like the easiest language to learn, I think. So that was like a cultural shock to me.
Yeah, I remember, sorry for interrupting, Kara. I remember when I first learned about this feature of the German language, that it can actually result in creating this railroad type of words, like very big ones. So yeah, that was something that made a strong impression on me.
I like I remember a horrible word in German. It's a zusammengesetzte word. So I was out with friends, and I had like one friend who is like absolutely sarcastic. Like he's absolutely sarcastic. He like, and so he looks at the girls, at women at the bar, and he's like, die übergebliebene Blondinen, and so it's like one word. Die is the article, übergebliebene long word, and Blondinen is like
the leftover
it would mean
blondies.
Leftover blondes. He called them, and I was like shocked, like how much gravity he put in that one word. And yeah, it's like I do believe like that's that idea and that language is the reason, or like is it chicken or the egg? I don't know, but like Germany created the most philosophers, actually. No, not Germany, Greece.
It's interesting because both Portuguese and German are gendered for every noun, but some genders are different in a way that I cannot understand. For example, is the sun masculine or feminine?
In Russian as well, It's differentiated also in French. So
French
the
it's
sun
feminine, isn't it? Or le soleil.
in
I
Russian
don't
is
remember.
neutral.
I find it interesting that the native speaker found the question like, because for me it's so it feels so important that the sun is either masculine or feminine, because the Germans think of the sun as the mother that gives the energy and nourishes us.
Wow,
Mother.
Dizona.
Dizona. In Brazil, the sun is strong and powerful. Like that's masculine. And for me, it feels very important somehow.
In Russian, it's neutral. So the sun is it, like it's neutral. It's it's like it's not he, it's not she, it's it. It's a thing, basically.
Yeah.
Whereby
an English,
Earth.
I was going to say, from an English speaker's perspective, when I first learned some French, it was just shocking to say, like, it felt entirely like an add-on. You're like, here's a noun. You're like, oh, I have a noun for that. And they're like, for grass. You're like, yeah, it has a gender. And you must memorize the gender along with the thing. And I'm sure there are cultural associations and the way it maps into the cultures that those languages arose from, where those genders are really important to the words and how people understand them and how they connect to things. So learning it as a second language, I think definitely it was just sort of an abstract concept in my head.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder when English lost their gender for their language. I know that English, as we become more egalitarian, we've lost also the concept of hierarchy in our language. So like the words thou, thee, and thou, those were used for people that were close to you. And so you would use thee if I saw you like as an equal. But I would use the word you if I saw you as superior to me. And so we just got rid of thee and thou, and now we just use you and your. But there's still other languages out there that have retained their hierarchical language. And I know Korean is one of them. So like a boss talking to his employees, they have different language than the employee would use for the boss.
German still does it. Z.
Z and Z.
But it's also very interesting because in Portuguese you can say o senhor e a senhora if you want to be extra formal. And I would use that with older people like my grandmother and with God, o senhor is God. In German, you always talk to somebody that you really like with the informal, because like intimacy is it's not a sign of respect somehow. In Portuguese, the distancing is the respect, and in German, the proximity is. Yeah, but it has the proximity is respectful, but the person higher in the authority needs to offer it to you. So they would say we can talk informally with each other.
Haris, how is it in Greek language?
Basically, just before I forget, I had a small comment related to what Valeria was saying about the masculine, let's say. And I remember that back in the day, I used to create some linguistic games, and some of them, they were in English, some in Greek, because I am a native Greek speaker. So one of them, it was the following. Can you name 5 countries? Because in the world, there are like 195 countries, something like that. So can you name 5 countries that they are masculine, but do not use countries like San Marino, because in Saint Dominican and all of that. In Greek, in the Greek language, we call them Aios Marinos, Aios Dominikos. So can you think of 5 languages that they are masculine? And everyone was busting their head. Actually, there are only 5 of them. Namely, it's Canada. I'm just sharing just to see the difference here. Ο Καναδάς, Canada, ο Παναμάς, Panama, ο Λίβανος, Niger, ο Νίγηρας, and Ecuador, ο Ισημερινός. So these 5 countries only they start with, let's say they are masculine. All other countries, they are feminine. Η Κύπρος, η Ελλάδα, and so that's something that I find particularly interesting in terms of language and the Greek in particular.
You mentioned Greek, and then going back to more the cognitive grammar thing and love, and the fact that the Greek had like 4 different loves and we have only one. And that makes a difference in how we see the world, doesn't it? Like,
oh yeah,
philia and agape, and as opposed to just love.
Right. Yeah, English has just butchered the word love. Yeah, I love this ice cream. I love my wife. It's like, what? There's a problem there.
Yeah, we alias a tremendous amount of things, and one of the bad aspects, there's a lot of bad aspects to that, but one of the bad aspects is that you're free then with your biases to steer which of the ambiguous meanings you wish to take.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's why grammar is so important, is it eliminates that those ambiguities with the language.
I don't know if the grammar blocks that so much. Like, I think the ambiguity can still, like, you can still be valid in grammar and be taken multiple ways. But grammar at least provides a structure to say, like, that's grammatically correct in a cultural way, and that doesn't make any sense. But ambiguity fuzzes that, feels like.
But that feels.
So I think grammar includes the lexicon as well, right?
I don't know where we would draw those lines for culture.
Yeah, if you allow me, because this, what Peter said, I also stumble upon it. Basically, there is a relationship between what is called lexical semantics and cultural cognitive grammar. Both of these are subfields of cognitive linguistics, which is basically a psychologically and cognitively oriented approach that was developed, let's say, from the 80s onwards. So, yeah, there are some very nice similarities between these two, lexical semantics and cultural cognitive grammar, but also some nice differences. So one is the lexical semantics is bottom up. You start from the words, let's say the individual words, and you construct while cultural cognitive grammar that John focuses on, it's mostly top down. So yeah.
Right. They're interpenetrating all the way. So lexicon and syntax are a continuum in cognitive grammar.
But one important thing that seems to me to be important in talking about cognitive grammar is the things that we find important to differentiate and the things that we do not find important to differentiate. So, for example, the distinction between fear and anxiety in the German language, we almost don't talk about it. It's the same word, although for me those are radically different. But I think it has to do with the way that the Germans see the word, because it has been imported in the word that we normally use when we're feeling afraid. I'm considering myself German already. Is Angst, which has been imported in English because it has this. When the Germans are afraid, they are feeling Angst.
Wow.
And the way the Germans experience their fear feels different than the way the Brazilians experience their fear.
Really?
Yeah.
Like the actual
Amazing.
physical experience is different as well.
Like, is it different in the body?
Let me think.
Curious.
So it's the way we relate to things that are fearsome. I think Brazilians will be a lot more expressive and show much more.
Mm.
And the German have this anxiety, this diffuse anxiety permeating it. It feels different for me. The experience of scary things here and the experience of scary things there feels a bit different. Oh, Irena is saying that emotions are different and feelings are the same. That's probably because in Portuguese we don't differentiate between emotions and feelings. We only use the word emotion and feeling kind of interchangeable in Portuguese. And for me, those things, I use them interchangeably. So that's another example. Thank you. Thank you for pointing my mistake.
Oh, but I was curious about fear for a second, because depending on your upbringing or where you come from, I know some people can experience fear in they go into state of petrification, and others go into fight or flight, and those two feel absolutely different in the body. So, for example, to me, fear is something that will call to movement and action. So I immediately get super vigilant. The more fear there is, the more vigilant I am. Like, I'm ready to fight, basically. And for other people, fear feels like something immobilizing. And that's actually different. And I never thought it was cultural, basically. I thought it was more like a subjective.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about like fear of the future, like those more diffuse fears versus somebody is pointing a gun at me right now.
Like fear of death.
Yeah, fear of losing my job.
Hmm.
You can't be
Interesting.
petrified, you can't run from it, and you can't fight it.
Okay.
In the case of the future.
And it's inevitable, and it gets
Yeah.
everyone. Good. That's a light subject. Thank you, guys.
There you go.
I think in Brazil people would make the fear more concrete, you know, more the situation.
Mhm.
I am afraid of being disabled when I get old, as opposed to I am afraid of getting old.
Oh, we live in great times. By the time we are all old, there will be exoskeletons. So we will be able to control everything with our minds. What?
I wish.
Yeah,
Optimist.
I'm sure. I'm extremely optimistic. I mean, what else? Like, should we live in fear? Optimism is like the best option. It's like, I always think, if you think like really logically, optimism is a good solution.
I suppose that's true.
So, guys, before we move to the clips, I really want to hear from Chance. Chance, how's your internet connection? We're giving him
That's your chance.
It's still pretty shaky, I guess. I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to drink it in. One thing that came from me, I'm curious about the concept of Schadenfreude, and we have a distinction in English between Schadenfreude and let's say sadism. I wonder if there's such a distinction in the original German, Valeria.
The words mean like Schaden is when when you suffer when something bad happens to you, and Freude is happiness. So, for example, if somebody slips and falls, and you find that funny, that's Schadenfreude. It's any kind of happiness that happens when somebody's experiencing any negative emotion. I mean, everybody does it a little bit. It's
How do
not
they conceive
sadism,
of
it's
it
just
morally,
like,
would you say? Is it something that you should avoid?
for example, when you laugh and something bad happens to somebody and you laugh, should you avoid that? Yeah, I suppose.
I don't think it's
But
just that you laugh. Like you could laugh because somebody slips on a banana and you know the expression they make and you've slipped on a banana and you see they're not hurt and you're like, oh, okay, it was just kind of a funny
Right. That's
happenstance.
definitely
yeah.
That's different from like, I'm going to put a peel out here on the sidewalk and I'm going to videotape it and I'm going to wait till someone slips. And I really, you know, like the more they get hurt, like if they fall and there's blood or something or break a
That's
bone,
sadism.
that would be great. That's schadenfreude. That's like, that's
so it's
next
just
level,
sadism
maybe.
then.
Like you're enjoying the suffering of presumably someone else mostly. I guess it'd be particularly perverse if you're your own. Maybe that's sadism.
Yeah.
I think we've
Shout out to
digressed.
sadism.
Jeez.
Okay, guys. So to bring us back to the topic, I would like to play one of the clips. The clips are all in the description, and I hope we can play all of them. So let's see. Let's see if my internet will allow it. Hold on. Okay. It might be a little bit delayed due to technical issues. So let's wait a little bit. Can you guys see it?
Okay, we're good.
Okay, nice.
In which our cultural cognitive grammar, what I mean by that, by cultural cognitive grammar, are sort of the fundamental patterns of intelligibility, the fundamental and both individually and culturally habitual ways in which we formulate our problems and think about things and conceive of them. And try to remember that conceive originally meant to give birth. One of the fundamental forgettings that has happened is we have forgotten the kinds of knowing that make sense of this notion of wisdom. So the kind of knowing that we have reduced knowing to what I call propositional knowing. And this is the kind of knowing that is our grasping of facts that we assert in propositions that we believe. Like, I know that cats are mammals. There we go. There's a fact, and I'm asserting a belief. And then, of course, we've developed, and I'm a scientist, so I think this is a very, very good thing, by the way. We have developed ways of dealing with how self-deception creeps into the inferential processes by which we manipulate propositions and generate good theory, good belief. That's what the scientific and historical methods are. And I have training in both, mostly in science.
Yeah, great. Precisely in that clip, he talks about cultural cognitive grammar in reference to his meta theory of 4P, the ways of knowing. And yeah, I would like to give Valeria a word on that one first.
What should I talk about?
Why did you choose that clip?
Why did I choose that clip? Well, because because he gives this very clean definition of what is the cognitive grammar, the habitual patterns, both individual and the culture. So there's my individual cognitive grammar, like Harris was talking about, the models, the schemes, and the things that I have inherited from my culture in order to build my own.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and like the grammar of our own language, it's transparent to us. That's why it's so difficult to talk about it, because we see the world through it and we think like, yeah, that's the world, that the way that the world is. We don't see the lenses that of our cognitive grammar. So
That's excellent. Because at the moment we learn about another culture, the moment we have this constant contact with another culture, we will be able to see our own culture somehow through that new perspective. And it reminded me of the fact that Albert Einstein was married to a lady from Czechoslovakia or Czech. So it's like completely different culture. And they were like famously had absolutely nice synergy and conversations. Like it was helpful, let's say.
And also in other settings, not only in marriages, like in the context of let's say corporations or especially startups and small, medium-sized or micro enterprises, having this different culture, let's say between two of the owners or let's say the shareholders, and even within the staff. That's very good. That's always good, especially if you are dealing with research and you are trying to tackle some, let's say, tasks that they are creative in nature. Having these different perspectives and the diversity that comes from the various cultures is very, very good and very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I guess the idea of problem formulation, and if we are able to get more facts, get more, like, to know the situation better from different sides, we will be able to formulate the problems and find the solutions way easier.
It strikes me that, like, just the conception of, like, we have to formulate a problem and find a solution to it, and that there being like a single cause or a thing that we point at and we like that, we have to fix that. That notion, which is really simplistic, is something that's really common. To reduce something and say this was caused by that.
Yeah, the Newtonian.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. That's, I think, why it's resonant. And it's, we know it's a network of things that interact, and it is a hugely complicated, continually changing, self-feeding back, etc. But this conception of it's this caused that, the fix is then going to be to go back to what caused that. So if we just change that, well, that will point us in the good direction. That is a ridiculously simplistic notion.
Right.
But it seems like that's part of our grammar, that we do that all the time.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would be a privileged position, because that would assume that we could somehow restore the grammar that the bad grammar was born out of at the time, from the position of the bad grammar. And
that's
so
what John's trying to do.
Yeah.
Or at least just recognize that we're using this simplistic grammar, and like we're stuck in it. We're like, oh, all problems must be formulated in that structure. No, like there are other ways to formulate the problem.
Right.
The problem right there. That's another one.
So yeah, I think you have to work with what you've got. I mean, like you can't just escape your frame and just have the right frame, because if you could do that, then we wouldn't have this problem. So I think it's about having the frame that you were inherited, but trying to find the solution with what you inherited. And so the solution ends up having to, you'll end up overthrowing or getting rid of the thing you inherited, but you still have to work with it to a degree, because without it, you just have combinatorial explosion. And so, so you need it to a degree, but yeah, I don't think the idea of just being able to go back in time and then return to the source like that works.
I have one point at this point that has to do with language, basically, and this notion that not everything that is simple works. And I just wanted to mention that artificially constructed language called Esperanto, that it's very easy to learn, but actually fails because of it lacks of nuances, let's say, and some other characteristics of organic language that evolves through usage and over time. So yeah, I think there is also something there that has to do with this underlying grammar that each language is based upon.
One of the elements, this might be outside of, I'm not sure where it falls, it's less linguistic and more cultural, but a pattern that I see is where we'll have, I'm in the United States, we have shootings on a regular basis. And whenever that happens, like somebody uses a gun, media goes crazy with it. We had one where in Las Vegas, where somebody had used what's called a bump stock, which is a mechanism that lets you hit the trigger more frequently. Nobody had ever heard of it. We had the incident. The government responded and they passed laws to ban the bump stocks and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't the cause of the problem. It didn't change the problem. It was nonsensical, that response. But it struck me like the culture was demanding. It was like, all right, politicians, you have to do something in response to this thing that we are very agitated about. And then the government went through its roles of saying, well, all right, we got to do something. Well, let's pass a law about bump stocks. And then we can point at that and say, see, we did something. We are your saviors. So the whole structure of like looking to the government, something happens, government must respond. That is like built into the structure of at least my country's culture, that the government has to step up and fix these things whenever people get agitated about it, even if it's a nonsensical fix.
This is why I think problem formulation, it's half of the work, because if you manage to pinpoint down the problem in an appropriate manner, you can actually find the solution before the problem manifests itself, let's say. So we don't need to have, as you said, in that context of the shootings, we don't need to find solutions after the happening. We should be trying to do it before. So I believe maybe it's a failure of
reactivity.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Okay. So I want to expand on that, Algernon. I can relate to that to a personal degree. Actually, it's I have a cousin. I live with my cousin, and sometimes she'll have a problem with me and her husband because we didn't do the dishes or didn't do what she wanted us to do, and she'll get upset with us over it. And I'll go to her and I'll say like, hey, like, okay, well, let's get to the bottom of this. What do we got to do to figure this out? And she just wants I don't know how to describe it, as like a shallow solution, something that doesn't actually get to the root issue. It's something that's very surface level and it doesn't actually solve the problem all the way. And then like it just fades to the background, and then like 3 months later we have the same issue. And so it's like we don't, this idea of we don't really want to get to the bottom of things. We just want the superficial solution. Like I've seen that everywhere with like everyone in my life.
Is that the pattern of like a scapegoat?
Yeah.
But conceptually?
Interesting.
We're going to define a scapegoat and we're like, well, if we do that, then we fixed it because look, we fixed that little teeny thing that we declared was the cause of the problem. So, and we all just, it gives us something to put our hands on to go like, oh, there we go. that scapegoat mechanism is probably ancient.
Yeah. Wow.
In which John talks about scapegoating as a part of our cognitive grammar with Jonathan Pajot.
Oh,
Hmm.
I was thinking about what Peter said before, self-transcendence versus surrender to higher power, and the other thing, like how do I bring it to the current topic of scapegoating? So problem formulation in order to solve the problem before it manifests, and I was kind of seeing the through line to the idea of in some cultures, it's they are focused on preventing the problem through nurturing certain skills, like you should not be a certain way, so you prevent those problems. In other cultures, well, you can go through and like through all the sins. As soon as you ask for forgiveness, then it's fine, you're forgiven. Or there is like this that like not a scapegoat, let's say, but there is this your sins are already forgiven if you will do certain actions right now. But like some sins, like you cannot take back, let's say. It's way better to prevent it rather than seek forgiveness after. So somehow, weirdly, it all seems connected to the idea of self-transcendence versus surrender. Like if you are self-transcended, it seems to me like you are able to formulate the problem and find the solution before it happens, before it manifests. You are able to be the person who doesn't do things they have to ask for forgiveness for, or they, you know, it feels like more power to an individual. Wow, that got really dark very fast.
Chance wanted to say something.
Sorry, Chance, you got the mic.
Yes, so we were talking about superficial fixes to problems and stuff, and I think it's something like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Like you recognize something as a problem, you want to fulfill your obligation to reject it, but to go in and actually fix the problem, the cost is too high or it undermines other interests. And I think that's where the rub is.
It strikes me that like there's a demand for it to be simple and to be fast. And if they're complicated problems, then they're probably not simple or fast solutions. But like the demand for the solution calls for this something, and we're like, throw out the simple and fast thing.
And
yeah, quick fix.
Even thinking that
Is
the
this
problem
nonsense?
has... Oh,
No, please. Please.
there was maybe a delay. Yeah, but even thinking that the problem has one cause is part of our cognitive grammar. If and I think there are studies on that if you go to Asian countries, they think more in terms of the context of the situation instead of thinking about the situation decontextualized. So the fundamental attribution error, that is our tendency to attribute other people's mistakes to their characters and traits, and our mistakes to the situation. That just
Whoa, that's amazing. Hang on, sorry, Valeria. That's a cognitive thinking distortion. The fundamental attribution error, is that what you called it?
The fundamental attribution error, I think.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna look that up. That's awesome.
Yeah. If you do something wrong, that's who you are. If I do something wrong, that was the concept, the context. I had my reasons.
in Russian culture, there is never one problem or never one reason for a problem. It's like if you all remember the Russian nesting dolls. You open it up, there is another one. You open it up, there is another one, and and the idea it's indefinite. Like even in the tiniest last one, the one you cannot open up, it still goes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It's indefinite, and it's indefinite. How was it indefinite? One thing has a beginning, but like, okay. So it had a beginning, but it goes.
Infinite regress.
Yeah.
Infinite versus indefinite. Yeah.
Right.
And I like, so and why it keeps going? Because it's in constant movement. As long as there is time, it will keep producing itself into smaller and kind of sort of fractal matter. And that's the way with the, and this way, it was like very well shown the way, at least in my culture, the way I was educated, the causes for something were seen. You see a surfacey thing, but inside that surfacey thing, there is another one. And then it will keep doing as long as there is time and as long as the circumstances will change, like it will keep growing, let's say. And I have it in my kind of already in my nature. I see that there is, it's never black or white, ironically. There is like different reasons for stuff.
I feel the urge to ask ChatGPT if it were to reimagine Russian nesting dolls using a Western perspective. And there would be like, there's two dolls and you open up each one and each one has exactly one interior and one's good and one's bad.
Nice.
Oh, like yin and yang?
Well, like simplistic, binary,
okay,
shallow, no infinite regression, no living process, static. All of those things seem to map pretty well onto this idea of just a shallow engagement. Whereas when you get to infinite regression type things and living processes, like you were describing with the doll, that there's a lot more opportunity there. That's a much more depth to it.
Yeah.
I think our problem is that if you think in terms of good and evil in the abstract and leave them in the abstract, but we try to find what that things are in the concrete, independent of the situation. And that's where it gets problematic. It's like if you want to make the connection between the abstract and the concrete, you need to have the situation. But if you want to make the abstract concrete independent of the situation, I think that's when the problems arise. This is always bad and this is always good, independent of the situation. That's
the elimination of nuance. Yeah. I think I follow what you're saying. Yeah.
Aristotle said there were these things that were always evil, like murder, and I'm kind of inclined to agree with it. But I think that yeah, there's a lot of wisdom to be found in that. I think if you neglect the nuance of good and evil, then you can easily fall down into a dogmatist pit of moral righteousness and then be evil in the name of good. So
euthanasia, one could argue. Death penalty, there's definitely people that think that that's not always evil. I mean, they have also killed Socrates, so some people never thought that was not evil.
Excellent counterexample.
pretty good.
Did you say they killed Socrates?
I mean, it's not unambiguous. Although in the time of Socrates, it was probably a terrible example. That was a absolutely bad example.
But that idea of just like taking an action and saying this action is always good, always bad, that's a simplistic, like we can all intuit and say, no, like it matters what the thing is. Like why? Like you're about to be slaughtered and you're trying to defend yourself, and you're like, oh well, and then in the defense you kill the other person. You're like, oh well, in that case, I guess it's all right. You're defending your family or something. But
All right.
anyway, simplistic, superficial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trolley problems. Kill one person to save how many
Right.
that it's very hard to.
The ultimate trolley problem of killing baby Hitler in order to save millions.
Oh, just cuddle him until he finds the world is good.
That's a better solution. You're right. Chance,
Or
would you
burn
like
down
to?
his preschool.
He was. I don't think he went to. Okay,
I don't
Chance,
know.
would you like to add something before we move to another clip? It will be the last clip. We don't have much
So
time.
we're kind of getting into, yeah. So we're getting into some of the more abstract concepts that maybe the rest of our cultural cognitive grammar is kind of founded on. I thought it was interesting. William James, back in the early 1900s, before the whole cognitive revolution, kind of had an intuition of this. He writes, as time, space, and the ether soak through all things, so we feel abstract and essential goodness, beauty, strength, and significance, justice, etc. soak through all things good, strong, and just. Such ideas and others equally abstract form the background for all our facts, the fountainhead of all possibilities we conceive of. So it seems like the load-bearing pillars of our cultural cognitive grammar are these abstract concepts. That's kind of my take on it.
Thank you.
As you were going through that list, I was just thinking, I'm like, do we have a common concept of what beauty is, etc.? If those are our foundational things and we don't agree on them, it's going to be a shaky thing.
But that is the thing. That is the thing.
Maybe we need institutions to attend that.
No, like if you think about beauty as the thing that moves us and attracts us, and you know beautiful when you see it. Like trying to make the concrete thing, this is the beautiful and this is the not beautiful, and nail down the abstract. That's when things get weird. But if you think about beauty in the abstract, I know when I find something beautiful or not. And I know how it changes as I get a more refined sense of beauty.
Yeah, well, the thing is I thought Jonathan Peugeot had a really good answer as to the whole modern art controversy, which is like, how do we define art? Is this thing art? Is this thing not art? And he said that, well, we got to go back to, maybe you can go back to the source, but we got to go back to the original meaning of what art meant. And it meant to fit things together. It comes from the word art, which just means to fit together. And we still use that kind of not that meaning of the word art when we refer to skills, like the art of tea making or the art of, I don't know, some kind of craft or something, the art of programming. And so a good artist is someone that is able to take something and make it so that it fits you to beauty. And so what that means is that beauty still exists. It's still like a real thing, but there's what's beautiful for one may not be beautiful for another, but it doesn't mean that beauty doesn't exist, or that beauty is entirely subjective, or it's all relative, or that all art is just whatever you want, because obviously a lot of the modern art that's being made today doesn't have this affordance to beauty. They're usually just political statements. And so so I don't know, there's it's art if it affords you access to beauty, but I don't know if that's a relative thing or not, in essence.
Harris?
Yeah, basically what it was discussed right there by Peter actually reminded me the notion of coming from the psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist. He has this notion of fittedness of different parts interlocking and working well together. Now, going back to that other important notion of beauty, one of the okay, this is it makes sense for me because it strikes a personal chord, let's say. But there was this is something that not a lot of people they are familiar with. It has to do with one of the seven ancient. The so-called ancient wonders of the ancient world, let's say. It was the Colossus of Rhodos, or Colossus Rhodos. It was a really, let's say, a very large structure that was also used as a lighthouse in the island of Rhodes. And one of the lesser-known facts is that it was a very big structure that it was commissioned and produced by a sculptor called Harris that shares the same name with me. So this is why I find this, let's say, a personal affinity with it. And nobody remembers the sculptor, but they remember the artifact, let's say. And basically what happened there, it's a very sad story. Somebody, after he finished it, someone came up to him and goes to him, hey, you know what, it's perfect, but not so perfect because you made a small error there. And this guy, because he was a perfectionist, he committed suicide. So because because he realized that small error that the other guy pointed out. So yeah, I was always keeping that in the back of my head, like, don't be so perfectionist, Harris, you know. And the last thing I wanted to say is that even after that large structure was actually there for many centuries, and a lot of people, because Rhodes it was a nice port and an important port in ancient times, a lot of ships and people they visited there for merchant purposes and all of that. And at some point there was an earthquake, and the whole structure collapsed. So even after it collapsed, still a lot of people visited just to dive and watch that sculpture because of its beauty. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I don't know. Is it relative? Is it not? I think the answer is yes and no.
Oh, you mean it's not subjective or objective?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the fact, see, but that's an example of how we are caught in our own cognitive grammar. The fact that we kind of need a resolution about, is it objectively beautiful or is it not objective, as if those things were always separable. That is just us being caught in our Cartesian grammar. There was an example right there.
We need to know the place on a map.
The story of the sculpture made me think that, like, in that person's cognitive grammar, there was this perfection state that he was aimed at. And then when it became unreachable in a way that he couldn't overcome, I think that led to his suicide is astounding. But just the idea that, like, to conceive that there is perfection and that you should aim for it, like, that's part of the grammar. Like, why would that even be a thing? Why would there be a perfect state?
He was a sculptor, so maybe for that, let's say, craftsman, it had something to do, because there is a very recently I am following an account on Twitter. I don't actually remember the name now, but they recently posted a tweet tagging Elon Musk, and they go to him like, maybe this is the most viral tweet ever. And it actually had this, the tweet was about a sculpture. And it was like, isn't this the most beautiful type of artwork that you have seen? So, yeah. it has to do with I don't know, maybe with the current times, what people they believe to be beautiful or not. But some things maybe they have this diachronic element feature into them. So even if we got someone from the ancient times and we showed him like a sculpture, like I don't know, all those sculptures from Aphrodite and all of that, I still believe that people will find it beautiful, even back then and even today. So it doesn't go with everything, but maybe for some types of art. Sculpture being maybe one.
I got to think that I'm with Valeria and that we're framing this as like something is beautiful or it's not beautiful. And that's not the like a real frame. That's part of something that we're assuming, and maybe it's our grammar, but the way we're thinking about it.
It's so hard to get to not think from those habits, to not see the world in those ways. It's so hard to get out of it. The habit is very strong.
Yeah, it seems like something like a confusion between like a heading and a destination. Like if you say you're going north or to the north, well, you can't get to north, you know, it's just a compass heading.
I wanted to add about the art. Should it be beautiful, like with a personal story? Like I think about 10 years ago, we were visiting an art gallery, and there were all these upcoming painters presenting their work, and there were paintings that were masterfully done, like every little detail, it almost like a photograph. It's just like done by a human hand, and didn't move me at all. And then I come into the room and I see paintings, but they hang above our eyes, so we have to move our heads up like that to see them. They're like almost by the ceiling. And it immediately gave me a sensation of being small. And the paintings were not crafted carefully. They were just thrown with, like, I could actually see the painter, like in my imagination, just throwing the black paint on the canvas. And so the paintings all were kind of different variation of one thing: a cabot-like figure of a person with massive fists and a tiny, tiny head on top. So what you see with your eyes, you just see the fist, the shoulders, the leg, this huge cabot giant with almost no head, like just the head is somewhere. And you absolutely don't see the face. And like I experienced like a sensation of terror being in that room. It was not beautiful, but it definitely moved me, and it was insightful. It had transformative like experience. Like it gave me this sensation of like, oh, I understand something. Oh my God, I need to do something about that thing. Like I had, yeah, it was transformative for me. And I think it's art, and I do remember the name of the artist. His name is Alex Sloan. I kind of befriended him. I shook his hand. I talked to him, and like I even signed up for his courses. That's how much I was impressed by his work. And it took him one afternoon for the entire collection just to throw on the thing. And I asked him how did he do it, and he said, I had a feeling. I had just this feeling, and I wanted to put it on a canvas. And I received that feeling that he experienced. It was amazing.
It has something beautiful about it. The experience of it. Oh,
I was gonna say something similar about like, it is beautiful that one human can have you know, an emotion or an idea, a concept, and they transform that into a visual or whatever medium. And then you can show that to another human and they can get, I'll say not the same evocation, but some semblance of the same feeling that the artist had put into it. And that you can, you know, that works. And you can feel that across generations, across from the artist to the receiver. There's something beautiful in that. And the fact that we have that use of the word beautiful points, just like we've got these 5,000 definitions of love, it points at something that beautiful is not just like aesthetically pleasing. Like that's the superficial version of it.
Yeah, beautiful is a feeling.
Maybe the fittedness.
Yes, yeah, fittedness for sure. It's something that I like what you said. It's across generations.
It's
amazing.
independent of the grammar somehow.
Also, Martin Heidegger, he actually talk about enframing, and he referred to it as a calling forth. Let's say a calling forth from the Gestalt, from the whole. So it was a rather challenging claim to reveal the real. That is what everyone is seeing, let's say. So yeah, it also has to do with another notion of strangeness. That is, I think the previous generation, they understood it a bit differently than us. So yeah.
The concept of perfectionism, and Kara even expressed this in the way that she talked about the painting, early painting, where, you know, it would be perfect, it would be pixel perfect if it looked just like it does in real life. And for a time, artists were aiming at that realism. And now we have like sort of trivial photographs. We're like, boop, there you go, better than anything you can draw. It's, you know, it's a copy. And that's like, that's not beautiful. I mean, you can have photographs that evoke things, but just the fact that you took a photo and it was a great copy is the beauty of that is not there.
I wonder
in our
if there
modern
is,
time. Go ahead.
I wonder if there is some element of a cognitive grammar there that think that realistically looking is better than something that has the subjectivity in it. You know?
It feels like we were striving for that for a while, and now that that's technologically trivial, there's a shift. We're like, now we have to go other ways. Like now I want to blend 2 or 3 or 5 things together and make shiny cats out of silver.
If I think about it, the scientific worldview and the Enlightenment mentality and the trying to get a realistic grasp on the world, like a faith, a fidelity in my grasp of the world, as if there is one grasp possible of the world, you know, one way of seeing the world, one ontology that is the ultimate ontology. And this seems related to me somehow. As opposed to John coming and saying, no, relevance realization is a thing. It's so you want a picture that makes relevant to you what is relevant, and that is beautiful. Like if you have like you want things that highlight what is valuable, that makes the salience and the relevance, as opposed to just having a flat thing that is this is what reality is. I don't know, there seems to be something there.
Okay, guys, we are short on time. There are clips that we didn't have time to play today because the conversation flow. I provided the links below. Please check it out. It's in the description. So, guys, what are you checking out with? Is there anything you would like to add or talk about next time, or what interesting things you found about today's conversation. And I would like to go with Arjuna first.
I think for me, the most useful part of this is to consider what in our modern day are what I see as the cultural element, the cognitive grammar elements. Like, what is the pattern of it? This is a lot of times that I'm focusing on the details of it, of whatever the controversy of the day is. And it feels like when I step out away from it to look at the structure of it, like, why is this the question? Why is it framed this way? And how often does it get framed in that way? Like, that interesting, that's like a meta way of looking at it from a little bit outside of the culture. And that feels sort of like a useful perspective. And so that's how I think that I will use this information going forward, is to try to look for some aspects of that grammar in how I experience my culture.
Peter?
Well, I found a lot of the science or philosophy behind cognitive grammar really interesting. It makes sense that Vervaeke has added a lot to it as a cognitive scientist himself. Going through the history was really interesting, and exploring the idea of whether or not these ideas were perennial or if they were historical was also interesting. I kind of have a hunch that they're perennial, thinking of the Gnostics, who separated matter from spirit and labeled matter as evil. So I have a feeling that maybe these problems in our cognitive grammar are perennial problems. But yeah, the object-subject distinction that being invoked and the synthesis of that was also very interesting. So yeah.
Thank you. Chance?
Okay, got it working. So one of the biggest things about John's work that I find interesting is this pursuit of self-knowledge and just kind of making sense of the world and being aware of things. And, you know, diving into the topic of cultural cognitive grammar, the biggest thing I'm coming away with is that it's largely things that we're not aware of, something like that sits below consciousness. And so in pursuit of trying to render this visible, I think being in dialogue with others and getting that contrast and gaining some capacity to indwell a different perspective is absolutely essential for that. And so thanks for having me here and having the possibility to do some of that. Thanks.
Thank you for being here, Chance. Harris?
Yes. So what I wanted to say in my conclusion is the following: that Professor John Vervaeke uses cultural cognitive grammar as a tool to analyze various phenomena, let's say diverse phenomena, that they are mostly related to what we call meaning, relevance, sagacity or wisdom, and even spirituality. So cultural cognitive grammar it's a powerful framework for understanding how we make sense of our reality through symbols and also through metaphors. And in a way, we can improve our own cognitive skills, our cognition, let's say, and even our communication by becoming more and more aware of the underlying patterns that shape our thinking. So it was great to have this, to be part of this discussion. And I think we've managed to explore this very difficult topic.
Oh yeah, thank you, Valeria.
Yeah, thank you, Harris. There was a few things there. I think that the most important two things that I think are important in the conversation is one that this cognitive grammar is the lenses through which we see the world, and as a lens we are usually not aware of the lens. So as Harry said, or I think Chance said, it's something that is transparent to us, and we can get in touch with it by getting in touch with other ways of thinking, and by really trying to get a felt sense for these concepts. I think that could give us a new set of lenses. So for example, I do not need to always separate something as being objective or subjective and trying to find out what is real. The real is in between those. The real is how they fit together. Or most things have more than one cause. They do not have only one. They happen in a context and have several causes. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I think that those things are important. Things can be opposing each other and working towards the same goal, like the opponent process idea. Another one that he put in after Socrates is that you can never see all aspects of a thing. It gets a book, and like you either see the book from this side, and that's why the dialectic is important. The good versus bad, as opposed to seeing trade-offs. If I increase that, I have this and consequence. If I increase that, I have that consequence instead of trying to find the right one. Those are all things that I think that John is offering us as alternatives for our habitual ways of thinking. That I think that if we internalize them, for me, it has helped me a lot. So I think that would be my takeaway.
Thank you, Valeria. I do like the idea that we cannot know the reasons, like there is always another reasons behind the things. We cannot know the exact situation 100%. It's no way we have to just understand that we will not know all the facts.
Yeah.
And the facts are still, they are not stationary, they keep moving, they keep evolving, they keep changing. So with time, like it's and cultural cognitive grammar, it helps us, it unburdens us, but it also narrows our seeing things. And it's important to see the world from other perspectives, so we can formulate problems better. That's my takeaway from today's series. I really deeply enjoyed the part about the language differences and the art. So a little announcement: we will have a summer break. And I think we will be back in 3 weeks, hopefully. Let's see. Thank you everybody in the chat. Thank you everybody in the room, our panel. Chance, if you get the chance to show yourself for a second, or like I will please check out the thumbnail.
He showed himself and it was just a blank screen.
There you go.
There we go. Yes. Yes. See you in the next